Hey viewers, my name's Kara. I'm your host for Tuesdays here on the Pagan Perspective. This week we're talking about deepening our experiences of deity or deepening our relationships or connections with or to deity. This week's topic will be in the description of this video as always so that you can read it yourself, but it is as follows. Quote, I've recently been getting more focused on spirituality in my practice and have since discovered that I feel greatly called to follow and to learn all I can from the goddess Hecate. My problem is that I'm having trouble finding any source of information on her. Outside of meditation and exploration of what little I can find of her in mythology, I don't know how to deepen my relationship with her. If you have any recommendations on how I could get closer to the goddess with the limited resources I have, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. End quote. Now, I should preface that this topic very likely came into us a year or more ago because we get so many topic suggestions that it takes several months before we get to the next ones in line, So I'm not sure exactly how long ago this was suggested. Maybe this person has already learned a whole lot more about Hecate since they asked us this question. Maybe they've already answered this question for themselves and gone on from there. So I am going to focus a little bit on a broader topic this week as well, but a little bit about Hecate specifically. I will say when you're looking up any specific deity information, for example, with Hecate, there are multiple pronunciations of the name. So I most readily say Hecate. There's also Hekate, Hecate, all different sorts of pronunciations depending on the language. The actual Greek pronunciation probably has a silent H. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it, but for example, I know we might say Hera in an anglicized English version of the goddess Hera, as her name would be pronounced in Greek. So pronunciations will differ, and similarly, there are different spellings of names. There are also different nicknames of different deities that, depending on how different people worshipped them, there are different epithets or additional names given to them. So that's one thing that it'll be important to research when looking up any sort of deities. Admittedly, when I was originally reading this topic, I was very confused by it, though, because Hecate, which is just, again, just the way that I pronounce the name, doesn't mean that's the correct pronunciation. There are many. But even just thinking of the goddess Hecate, she is one of the, I think, more well-documented Greek deities out there, and the Greek pantheon in general tends to be much more well-documented than many other pantheons of deities, and Hecate being one of the more well-documented goddesses within that pantheon, and definitely one that is very commonly worked with by a lot of modern practitioners today. So I was a little confused when I first read this topic that this person said they're having trouble finding any source of information on her because there's a ton of information about this goddess all over the internet. And then they go on to say, other than exploration of what little I can find of her in mythology. So that tells me they did already research the mythology aspects and looked up the areas of myths and stories that have to do with Hecate. So I don't know if that means that they found some of them but not all of them, or that they did find all of the information but still wanted or thought that there should be more than that. So yeah, so my sort of first reaction to this is, if we're, as people within the community, if we're having trouble feeling like we're finding any information that would enable us to seek out a relationship or deepen a connection with a deity among those that are really well documented and where there are tons of other people working with them and writing about them and publishing articles and blogs and all sorts of things about them all the time, then what are we going to do when we feel called to work with a deity that there really is little to nothing known about, other than maybe a brief mention in some folktale or in some historical document? You know, there are some deities that we may only have a mention of their name and there is literally nothing else about them. So when I think of like, we're having trouble figuring out what the next step is with these really well-known and well-documented deities, then we definitely have to do something about that issue before any of us can really hope to have a roadmap as to what to do about deities or any other type of spirit, entity, energy, etc., that is not well documented at all. So, in that regard, I'm sort of expanding the topic for myself this week to ask, how do we take the information that we are able to find and turn that into a personal practice? I think that is ultimately the question that's underlying this topic. Because again, I don't know exactly what this person had already read or researched at the time that they suggested this topic. It was probably over a year ago. They've probably done a lot more research since then. But yeah, Hecate being a deity that there is honestly a ton of information about, the issue then must be that either one, we expect there to be something more, and then my question is, what kind of information are we expecting to find about deities, or what kind of information do we want to be told by someone else about what we should be doing in deepening our connection with deity or any other types of energetic or spiritual beings, right? What do we think we're going to find out there that we're not finding? And how can we create that resource for ourselves or for other people to help them out? So number one, we must think that there is more, or that we want there to be more. Or number two, we have all that information, but we don't know what to do with it. So we're just kind of sitting on it. So again, it comes down to, what do we do? How do we make that into a personal practice? So yes, when thinking about deepening connection with deity, one of the best places to start, of course, is any mythology, any actual documented stories that we have about them. And that might be something that we refer to as mythology. Specifically, it might also be folklore, fairy tales, little legends that may exist in different regions, different specific areas, stories that are told. So that kind of falls under the category of mythology for me. In addition to that, there's other types of research. For example, today I read just the Wikipedia page about the goddess Hecate. And on that page alone, I found tons of information that would enable me to then create various personal rituals for myself based on the information. None of what I was reading was the mythology, the actual stories that Hecate plays a role in. But the Wikipedia article, for example, as well as many other resources online, they have other research type information, such as who worshipped Hecate historically, where was she worshipped, how was she worshipped, what are some of the symbols that were associated with her worship, what were the temples or shrines like, where did people set up their altars to Hecate, what time of day would they typically worship her, which meals were dedicated to the goddess Hecate, and what might they have consisted of, what are the specific practices surrounding leaving offerings to this goddess. All of that I learned just from the Wikipedia article. And that type of thing is a perfect jumping off point. So I refer to that type of stuff as the other part of research. Because, of course, reading the mythology is part of research and getting to know what is already known about a deity, but I like to keep those sort of separate in my mind as mythology being the stories themselves, the more research information being the other stuff that you can find out about, like historically, how were they worshipped, who worshipped them, when, where, how, all of that type of thing. And then also what I mentioned before about them having various nicknames based on the way that they were worshipped in different areas. Typically that also has different mythology behind it, different stories about a way that a certain deity played a role in the life of these people in a certain area, and so they then started referring to that deity in a certain way based on that, by calling them the light bringer or the protector, or whatever the case may be, keeper of the keys, things like that have to do with various symbols and aspects of Hecate, or again, any deity that we're talking about. That's all additional research stuff that you can find out. And again, there are definitely some deities, entities, etc., that not all of that stuff is known today. There is information that we have lost, that has not been passed on. But for many Greek deities, and definitely for Hecate, a lot of that information can be easily found, and that's a great place to start if you haven't looked into that stuff already. The next thing I have written down here on my list is blogs and other personal experiences from practitioners today, modern day worshippers of whatever deity it is that you want to deepen your connection with or start a connection with. Hecate, again, being a big one that I've seen many people write articles and blog posts and websites about the deity, about their relationship with them, about their personal practices, ways that they have modernized things based on the information that we have from historical practice and worship, how different people have adapted that to their personal life in the modern day. And so those are definitely resources that if you have not already, you definitely want to look up. And again, there may be a deity or an energy or entity or a spirit. All of these things I'm talking about, right? I feel like I have to keep saying it so that I'm reminding everyone I'm not just talking about deity as such. This applies to any other aspect that may come up in our practice of wanting to develop a connection with another energy or spirit. So yeah, I feel like I have to keep reminding you that it's all of those things, but if I don't remind you every single time, just know that I'm talking about all those different things. Anyway, other personal experience of other people who have already done similar work or are doing similar work is definitely going to be a great resource for you. There may be energies, etc., that you feel drawn to that you don't find other people writing about. And it might just be that the search parameters are not wide enough. It might be that, because of algorithms and the way that internet searches work, there is information out there, but it's not coming up in your search. So definitely learning some tips and tricks for advanced internet searching and different ways to use keywords and stuff like that can definitely be helpful. If you happen to be a college student or a university student or a teacher or professor or know anyone who might have access to academic or scholarly databases, sometimes those can also have information that you may not find just in a generic Google search or something similar. I know when I was in college and I had access to those academic databases, which I do not have access to anymore, not being a student or part of a college or university, network, there was a lot of good information in there. However, lately, there have been places where I see people online sharing free resources, free ebooks, stuff like that, that do exist, that are available for the general public on the internet, but that I just didn't know that they existed, and they might not necessarily come up in a Google search when I'm doing something like that. So yeah, maybe other people that you know have access to these different types of resources that could also be really helpful for you. The next thing on my list is meditation or trance, as this person mentioned in their initial topic suggestion. Other than meditation and exploration of mythology, I don't know what else to do. So for any of you watching this who are beginning to develop a relationship, meditation or trance, something similar, is definitely something that you do want to explore. So the person who asked this question already had touched on that, which I think is great, because that's something that I don't think a lot of people think about, because we think maybe that we have to only read what's available, that other people have said is what's true about a deity or whatever. And so we might not all realize that in our personal practice, we have the ability and we have the authority to go on our own meditative journey or meditative visit to interact with whatever this energy or deity is that we are developing our connection with or deepening our connection with. That those practices, meditation or trance journeying or anything like that, or even dream work, setting an intention that you would like to meet with a deity, etc., in your dreams, anything like that, that those can also be personal sources of information that help us have personal interactions with the deity, etc. The next one being ritual and other magical practice similar to that. That if your practice already involves ritual in any way, shape, or form, you can perform a ritual with the intention of deepening your relationship with this deity. And you can invoke the deity into your circle, or evoke them into the circle, invite them. Invite them into your circle to be present, and take yourself on a guided meditation, or just, ask questions. You can do a divination to gain messages from the deity or about the way that you may want to proceed in deepening the connection with the deity, etc. Any number of things you can make into a ritual, and you can have a ritual with the intention of deepening your experience with that deity. In addition to that, of course, you can also set up an altar that is dedicated to this entity that you want to develop or deepen a connection with. If you haven't already done that, that's a great option. And along with having an altar, you may want to come up with some sort of practice specifically around that. So it might not be a full-on ritual every time, but you might have a permanent altar set up that you might decide to do a daily devotion there, or a weekly devotion, or a weekly meditation there, or whatever the case may be for you. It's your personal practice. So what you decide to do is going to be up to you, and what you feel is important, and what works for you, or what your personal paths focuses are or tend to be, the kind of things that you like to do. But it might involve setting up an altar for them and doing a ritual to dedicate the altar to them, and making that a very nice ritual experience, very formalized, formal invitation into your life. And then it might be daily lighting an incense, or leaving some small food offering, or it might be a different type of offering, like reading a poem that you find that was historically used in this deity's honor, or it might be a poem that you found that might be more modern, or it might be a song lyric that you find that really speaks to their energy to you and that you recite or sing at their altar every day. Or it might be something that you write specifically for them. And that kind of thing, I think, is a great example, because that will depend on who you are as a person. If you are a singer, you might prefer to sing a song as your offering to this deity every day, or, once a week when you have decided that you're going to have their time, your time at their altar that week or whatever. If you are a writer, if you are a poet, then writing a poem might be something that feels very natural to you to do. If you're not someone who really is into either of those things, there are other things that you can do that are really more who you are as a person and who you are as a practitioner. So some sort of regular connection is what I put on my list here, because that will depend on the person. It'll depend on what's right for you. If you are working with, a deity who is associated with protecting travelers, for example, you might find that the best way for you to contact them or to connect with them is while you are traveling. So you might have a small item or symbol that is connected to them for you that you keep in your vehicle, so that while you are traveling, you have that connection with them, and that's your time connecting to them, because it's something that they do. It's an area of expertise for them. Or, something like deities who are protectors of the arts. You might actually want to incorporate things that they would have been doing. So in my video last week, I mentioned that we're talking about like tutelary spirits. One aspect of that term could be deities ruling over a specific location or a specific career, a specific type of activity. So, for example, there are deities of blacksmithing, smithcraft. There are deities of weaving and other forms of what we might think of as domestic arts. There are deities who specifically rule over children and childbirth, things like that. Some deities that are protectors of animals in particular. Many of them have a sacred animal or more than one sacred non-human animal associated with them. So what you choose to do for your regular connection with that deity might even be something like, if you decide to become devoted to the god of smithcraft, you might want to take a blacksmithing course somewhere, learn how to be a blacksmith yourself. Or you might just want to visit a blacksmith and purchase an item from them that has been handcrafted that you would then dedicate ritually to that deity. And that would be a further connection for you, because you've actually sought out something that is related to the craft that they protect, that they have something to do with. If you're devoted to a deity of weaving, you might want to learn how to weave, or it might just mean hand sewing something. You can take the information that you learn about them and somehow turn it into something you can do. So with Hecate, for example, Hecate, having trouble talking now, I need to drink some water up here. Hecate is often depicted with a dog as her companion, and so dogs are considered a sacred animal of Hecate's. Historically, people may have used dogs in ritual sacrifice to Hecate. Now today, that's not something that I would do. Something that I would do, however, is find a representation of a dog. Maybe it's a little stuffed animal, maybe it's a statue, maybe it's a painting that I love, or a photograph, or a drawing that I did, if you're someone who draws, Again, depending on who you are, what is your thing, I would find something that represents dogs, maybe, and put that on Hecate's altar, because dogs are sacred to her, and so I would put that there. And extrapolating that even further into how you could bring that connection more into your everyday life, I might think, well, if dogs are sacred to Hecate, if you are capable of and willing to do so, you may choose to adopt or rescue a dog and have that act be something sacred to this deity, because dogs are sacred to her, and so they should also be to you. You might even go a step further, or if you can't adopt a dog yourself, you might volunteer at a shelter that specifically rescues and works with dogs, So there are things that are beyond ritual and altar work and beyond sitting silently in meditation, that we can use information that we've learned about the deity, such as if dogs are sacred to them, or if they rule over a certain aspect of life, such as childbirth, or whatever the case may be, that we can take that information and turn it into part of our everyday life, part of our practice, part of our path. So that's my list of things. And the last thing that I wanted to mention is, if you are the type of person who loves to read books, I definitely have a book recommendation for you. It's a book that just came out, so I have not read the whole thing myself. I have not been able to get myself a physical copy of it yet, but I definitely recommend it. I know the author, and it is so perfectly suited to this topic. The book is called What is Remembered Lives, and it's about deepening our connections with deity, ancestors, and the Fae. It's by an author named Phoenix LaFae, and as I said, it just came out recently, and this is exactly what it's about. It is about how we begin to welcome a deity or our ancestors or the Fae or any other type of spirit or being into our lives, how we begin to interact with them, some basic tips and tricks, and then also how do we further those connections, deepen those connections and relationships once we have begun it. And so I highly recommend that book. I will put a link to the website of the shop that the author actually owns, and there's a page on the shop website that describes the book, and you can purchase directly from there. I think that would probably be the best way to get it directly from the author's shop. So I will link that in the description. But yeah, when I realized that I had put this topic in for this week, and then the book had also just recently come out and more people are talking about it now as they're starting to review it and things like that, I was like, this is perfect. So if you are inclined to read, I don't know if there's an audiobook version of it. I'm imagining not, because it's so new. But if you are inclined to read a book about this subject, I definitely recommend What is Remembered Lives by Phoenix LaFae. It will help so much, and I can attest to that even without having read the entire book, because I read the first couple chapters and because I've worked with Phoenix personally multiple times, and this is her wheelhouse. This is definitely an area that Phoenix is highly knowledgeable, very experienced with, and I greatly value her advice and opinion on this type of thing. So I definitely recommend that. And otherwise, this video has been 25-ish minutes of my personal thoughts on this general area. So yeah, looking up mythology, reading as much as you can about what is already available about a deity. And if it's not there, that, if we're looking to develop relationships with beings that really don't have a lot of documentation about them, not that there's a ton of it out there and we're missing it, but those that really just, there's not a lot known about them, that's where we kind of have to get to the point where we're comfortable enough in our own practice to know how to step into that totally unknown area and figure it out as we go. And that's where finding blog posts and articles and other personal experiences from other people who have done the same or similar work can be very beneficial, because it might be very new to us, but there might be someone else who's already been doing a lot of the work, and sort of working with those people, even indirectly through reading what they may have to share about their personal experiences, is super helpful. Definitely something that we should keep in mind. And then, yeah, being willing to say maybe the only way I have to learn about this deity is to trance journey to meet them, or invite them into my circles, or just make an altar. And if the altar starts out blank because we have no idea what the symbols of this deity are, then that's okay, and we'll learn them as we go. It's just important to start the relationship in some way and decide on the way that is best for you personally to integrate that energy into your life. So again, I think that also has a lot to do with knowing ourselves and knowing, what is most beneficial to us. Do I like the every single day sitting at an altar thing, or would I prefer singing devotional songs to the deity all throughout my day, and nothing ever has to be sitting down in a specific place or sitting still, but can I dance and devote it to this deity who appreciates dance? Or even if it's not specifically a deity of dance, but you are a dancer, maybe that means dance is your way of worship, So there's a strong element of knowing who we are as practitioners as well. Okay, yeah, I think that's all I have to say for this week. I will see you next month, because I believe next week is Subs Week. And until then, thank you very much for watching. Feel free to share any resources that you may have, or personal experiences that you may have that you'd like to share that may be helpful to other people, in the comments of this video. And I will see you next time. Until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.